Welcome to CareTalk, America's home for incisive debate about healthcare business and policy. I'm David Williams, president of Health Business Group.
And I'm John Driscoll, the CEO of CareCentrix. David, we were wrong. The FDA commissioner is not going to be our nominee.
I can't believe it, John. I don't know why they didn't consult with us. They almost always do. But in this case, they went ahead and nominated something old as something new. Dr. Robert Califf has been nominated to be the head of the FDA. So what do you think about that, John?
Well, David, I want to know who this guy is. There's got to be room in Washington for another old white guy.
Well, the thing is, John, he's only 70, so that is now the new middle age. But he is a cardiologist. That's among his his qualifications. He also has a qualification that he was actually head of the FDA before in the waning days of the Obama administration. But most of what he's done, John, is been at Duke, where he has been leading their clinical trial center and organizing real big trials for a long time. They refer to him, Biden used the term trialist. He's a clinical trialist.
Well, the reality is Dr. Robert Califf is one of the more qualified candidates. I do think that this administration, more than others, has really screened for diversity. And so I'm kind of half shocked that he got the job. But he's got a very good reputation. He's tough on tobacco, which is still kills and draws in way too many addicts and kills too many of them over time and adds enormous costs to the healthcare system. One of his big areas of research is on cancer and tobacco. He knows kind of how to make the trains run. I mean, this is an administration that, to put it gently, hasn't always led from the front from a management perspective. He's got a very good reputation, both with the Obama White House and within the FDA, of making things happen. And he's got a little bit of technology background. We've sprinkled a little Googlish. He's a little googly, David. Did you know that?
One of the people that we were thinking about for this role has also worked at so-called Alphabet / Verily. Of course, that was Amy Abernethy, who we met up with at Health.
We nominated her, didn't we, David?
That may be the problem, John. The problem was the nomination didn't come from a diverse set of people. That's the problem.
Well, I think that they were, for whatever reason, they have waited far too long. They at least responded to our demand that they move forward with someone. I mean, we're in the midst of a public health crisis. We're at one of the moments of enormous innovation and risk. We're trying to, as a federal government and people, reset the way we price and create access to drugs. It is sort of crazy that we don't have head of the FDA already in the seat and working. And it actually, at least for me, calms me a little bit that they've picked someone as well qualified who really kind of knows how to do the job as Rob Califf.
So, John, it seems like it makes sense and sort of clear, and it's not a diversity candidate. But I mean, why now? And if it was so obvious, why didn't President Biden just nominate him 6, 8, 10 months ago? It's not as though there's all of a sudden a crisis and a need for someone to run FDA.
Well, I think as much as we can read the tea leaves that are dry now, probably from being over tested, there was some movement, I think, to appoint Janet Woodcock, who was the acting director and actually has, again, a good background in knowing how to work the FDA. She was there are these major long-term bureaucrats who are directors of the bureaus. The FDA is a pretty large, complex organization. It actually covers everything from food, medical technology, public health, as well as pharmaceuticals. And she was an acting director and it's super smart, but somehow she was tarnished. I mean, there was early on, she somehow got on the wrong side of some of the constituency groups. And I think that created a pause, in as much as I can tell from the outside. What have you heard?
Yeah, John, I think it's the same thing. They wanted Janet Woodcock. She's competent. She's well-known. She's well-established there. But she lost favor, and they couldn't put her through. And then I think there's rules with this Vacancies Act that means that she can't be the acting person forever. They have to nominate somebody, and then she can stay acting for a while. So she may be the acting person for quite some time. Last time Califf was nominated, there was a long delay before he was finally confirmed. When he was confirmed, it was 89-4 back in 2016. That opposition came from Democrats, John, not from the GOP.
Well, it's bizarre that some of the criticisms are that any of the nominees might be somehow qualified because they have a background in pharmaceuticals. I mean, the problem in Washington is politicians not taking action on drug pricing, not whether people who actually know a lot about the regulatory process, who at one time or another are bureaucrats, have somehow advised some of these pharmaceutical companies. But that appears to be one element of taint that some of the advocates fix on. The more bizarre one for me is Senator Democratic at times Senator Joe Manchin criticism of Rob Califf, somehow blaming him for the opioid crisis, which is a collective moral and regulatory failure. Now, how he ties that to Rob Califf, I don't know. I mean, he was governor of the state when it was going down the drain in terms of the growth of opioid deaths, and Rob Califf could be no more blamed for the opioid crisis than the governor of West Virginia. But it appears to be a challenge, and Joe Manchin is one of the most important votes in the Senate, but he's only one vote. So I think that Dr. Califf is likely to get nominated, likely to be approved because he was well respected on both sides of the aisle because of his competence and expertise.
John, in addition to these complaints about how he handled the opioid uh, epidemic and supposedly being too lax on allowing the approval and distribution of these drugs, he also had let stand Janet Woodcock's approval of a drug for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, even when there wasn't that much evidence that it might work. Now, that's pretty indirect because he's not the one that made the approval. He just basically said she had not overstepped her authority. Now, interestingly, Public Citizen and another group I hadn't heard of called Revolving Door came out against him for being close to the pharmaceutical industry, as you say. Now, my only concern with his competence is that I see what they're criticizing him for is taking a total of $93,000 in consulting fees over the years from pharmaceutical industries. So my only criticism, John, is as a consultant, you know, that's not, you can't really make a living on $93,000 over a few years. I mean, that's a pretty bad consultant.
David, people should not get consulting from you. They should go to guys like Rob Califf, who are much more qualified than you, and it's clearly don't charge very much.
He's like undercutting us, by charging 90% less or something. I don't know what he's thinking.
But I think, David, look, he was the one who leaned in on regulating e-cigarettes. He was in the midst of taking action on vaping. He's all over. I mean, tobacco remains one of the biggest public health problems in America and the world, and he's all over it. He put a black box warning in for mixing benzodiazepines and opioids. Those are the drugs that a lot of folks use as antidepressants, and opioids obviously for pain. So I actually think that he has a pretty decent regulatory track record of being willing to take on big, entrenched, rich providers of either recreational drugs or drugs in the first place. And honestly, when I've seen him speak, he seems pretty thoughtful and tough-minded. And I think that there is a big advantage in having someone who's got some Google background in there. We have a serious dearth of tech knowledge and talent across the government at a senior level. I'm really encouraged by that. It's one of the reasons why I thought that Dr. Amy Abernathy might have been great. And while I'm not a big Duke basketball fan, as he is, I do think that it's a pretty strong appointment when you mix competence with the willingness to actually use regulatory authority. And he's got a very good academic reputation in the areas that he's done research, independent of the fact that he doesn't price his consulting at the extortionate rates that you do. I think it's a pretty strong appointment.
Yeah. Well, John, I think the Duke basketball fan, that is a bit of an issue, but I think he had to eat his hat, so to speak, and had to wear a Maryland shirt at one point because he lost some sort of a bet. It is interesting. I know we don't like to talk too much about the inside the Beltway proceedings. But it is interesting what might happen here. You mentioned Manchin as being a foe, and usually that's a problem because you assume that all the Republicans are against whatever it is that Biden is doing. Here, interestingly, another person that's in his corner is Bernie Sanders. So it's the two of them, and you got to wonder. I mean, you really think that all Republicans will go from having supported Califf last time to opposing him? Probably not. So I think he could probably make it. He can probably make it through. And I also wonder about, when I see these things from Public Citizen, for example, and they say it's too close to the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, what do they want? Some kind of complete ignoramus up there that's never done anything related to clinical trials when, after all, we are talking about drug approvals based on trials?
The process of presidential appointments through the Senate is really fraught with trouble. We've got two Republican senators, Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, who are sitting on like 30 to 40 foreign policy and national security appointees because they want, in one case, they want everybody to resign over Afghanistan, and the other, I don't know what Ted Cruz wants other than attention. But I think that the president, any president, really needs to have the ability to appoint the majority of who they want to actually run the government. These are thousands of jobs that need to actually run as we manage these $1 trillion budgets. It's sort of crazy because what happens when you don't have an appointee in place. Well, you can have an acting person in place, but they actually have a limited time in office. It's actually not the vacancy rule, but almost the anti-vacancy rule, that they want the biases towards putting someone in that role. And if you put a bureaucrat in that role, they're actually limited in terms of decision making, consciously so. So you've got a situation where you either don't have someone in place or you have someone in place who can't do much. And I think the bigger issue here, as you think about the inside the beltway, is how do you fix that broken process where, in depending on it, either the one or two senators can really gum up the works. But I agree with you in this particular case, because he's got has shown a strong track record of being a balanced advocate for the right kind of regulatory reform. I think he'll get through. And maybe he'll survive that obsession with basketball.
So, John, let's talk about. I do want to pick up on what you said about technology. And when we interviewed Dr. Abernathy, she said she stays up at night worried about data quality, and a lot of that has to do with the generation of real world evidence that's actually tied into the way drugs are used in the so-called real world. He has talked about that, Dr. Califf, that will be a priority for him. Let's look at some of the challenges that he's going to have to address, assuming he actually does get his day in the Senate and gets confirmed. There've been 8 directors of the FDA since 2015, John. That is kind of crazy. That's like worse than prime ministers of Italy during the heyday of the lack of cohesiveness in that government. And trust has been eroded, and it's a problem. So what is he going to have to do in terms of his agenda once he gets to FDA as the permanent director?
Well, I think actually there's plenty of work to do, David. I mean, I think that the FDA remains sort of one of the linchpin roles in the midst of this this public health crisis. I think there's plenty of work to do here, and I think he can do it. But the primary job of everyone in healthcare in America right now is to get us through and manage this pandemic. I mean, that's job number one right now.
So, John, we were way wrong about who was going to be nominated. Now, let's make a prediction. Will he be confirmed, and in what month, if so? You start.
I think that Dr. Robert Califf will be formally nominated and approved within the next 90 days.
Okay, I'm going to say yes, and also President's Day around then. That's going to be Biden's present as president. Well, that's it for yet another edition of CareTalk. I'm David Williams, president of Health Business Group.
And I'm John Driscoll, the CEO of CareCentrix. Thanks for listening, and please subscribe.